Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Radhi 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 Jasodanandana Brajajanaranja Brajajanadam Jasodanandana Brajajanaranja Brajajanadan Yamunatira Bhanachadi Tira Jamana Tira Vanachani Tira Vanachani Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari 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 Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Radhi 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 Yasodanandana Brajajanaranja Yasodanandana Brajajanaranja Yasodanandana Brajajanaranja Yasodanandana Brajajanaranja Yamunatira Vanachadi Natira Vanachadi Yamunatira Vanachadi Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari 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 Jaya Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivijagacharya Astatarasatasi Simad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Gaura Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. It looks like we'll be able to finish this whole chapter 10. Last two verses. The last two verses lead into the next chapter. Krishna has completed explaining, giving transcendental knowledge to Uddhava, the detachment resting upon knowledge. Just hearing this morning, Prabhupada was speaking in Geneva, 1974, summer. And he was saying, in India, it's very difficult. The parents want their children to become grihamedis. They want their children to become nicely situated in good education, good job, good money, good family, good home. And now our duties as householders are complete. He said it several times, very difficult. But in the West, you have an opulence. One of Krishna's 6 opulences, detachment, and you're very detached. Very many other things too, but very detached. And what's all that's needed is knowledge. So I've come to give you knowledge. He was speaking like that. So after the knowledge and detachment, 4 chapters worth, now comes the next wave of discussion. So listen carefully, because this is the springboard that tells what's the next series of responses from Krishna. And it's, very appropriate. Text 35. Oh, my Lord, Sri Uddhava said, a living entity situated within the material body is surrounded by the modes of nature and the happiness and distress that are born of activities caused by these modes. How is it possible that he is not bound by this material encirclement? It may also be said that the living entity is ultimately transcendental and has nothing to do with the material world. And how is he ever bound by material nature? How does the living entity get enthralled is the classic question. The fall of the jiva question, that one. This question of Uddhava is not identical, but almost identical with Devahuti's question of Kapila Dev. It's the same type of question. It's a how-to question. How is it possible that he is not bound by this material encirclement? Bhaktisiddhanta's translation. Sri Uddhava said, my dear Lord, the souls of this world are conditioned by the 3 modes of material nature, and thus they experience the happiness and distress that results from the activities performed under their direction. We discussed this yesterday, remember? According to Sankhya, this is the Sada Sad Yoni Janmasu, the cause of the happiness and distress is not the soul, but it's the material nature, because implication with material nature is identifying with it, and then it brings different results. And so one experiences the happiness and distress through Prakriti, the modes. How can the conditioned souls be considered as independent? One can argue that the living entity is spiritual in nature and thus has nothing to do with this material world. If this is the fact, then how has he become bound up by nature? BBT purport. Due to the influence of the modes of nature, the material body generates fruitive activities, which in turn generate material happiness and distress. This material chain reaction is indicated by the word deha, jeshu. Deha means from the material body. Jeshu means born. That's word for word. The personality of Godhead has shown Uddhava that the actual goal of life is liberation, not sense gratification, although the Lord has indicated that the living entity is liberated by devotional service performed with knowledge and renunciation. Uddhava apparently does not understand the specific means of perfection. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Uddhava's question implies that we observe even in the activities of liberated souls, such external activities as eating, sleeping, walking, hearing, speaking, etc., which are the functions of the gross and subtle bodies. Thus, if even liberated souls are situated within the gross and subtle material bodies, then how are they not bound by the material modes of nature? Good question. If it is argued that the living entity is like the sky, which never mixes with any other object and therefore is not bound, then one may ask how such a transcendental living entity can ever be bound by material nature. In other words, how would material existence be possible? In order to completely clarify the path of Krishna consciousness, Uddhava presents this question to the Supreme Spiritual Authority, Lord Krishna. So it's going to be a fun chapter, next one, because it's responding to this. Paragraph. In the kingdom of Maya, there are innumerable speculations about the Supreme Lord, who is variously described as non-existent, or as possessing material qualities, or as being devoid of all qualities, or as being a neuter object like a eunuch. But through mundane speculation, it is not possible to understand the nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, Uddhava wants to clear the path of spiritual liberation so that people can actually understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As long as one is affected by the modes of nature, perfect understanding is not possible. Lord Krishna will now describe to Uddhava further details of spiritual emancipation on the road back home, back to Godhead, back to Krishna. Prabhupada liked to use the word infected, like a disease. You infect, he would say, you infect a disease. When you infect a disease, you suffer. And best to not infect the disease. So one of the ways to not infect disease is have a good immune system. And that a good immune system, he didn't use immune system, but he said you become protected by the bhakti process itself. And the bhakti, it's not the behaviors per se, but it's the mood of submission to Krishna per se. That is, the opposite of turning away from Krishna is turning to Krishna. Then one is not infected or affected by the modes. Purport, Bhaktisiddhanta. Conditioned souls, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, describe the absolute truth as non-existent, or as possessing material qualities, or as being devoid of all qualities, or as being a neuter object like a eunuch. Same BBT borrowed from his commentary. How can a spirit soul, who is now conditioned by the modes of nature, be freed from the bodily concept of life? If the transcendental spirit soul is never actually touched by Maya, then why is he referred to as conditioned? Good question. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, glossed by Bhaktisiddhanta. It appears to ordinary people that even liberated souls also eat, sleep, walk, talk, and perform other similar activities just as they do. Considering this, how can it be said that a liberated soul is not bound by his gross and subtle bodies, which act under the direction of the three modes of material nature? It may be questioned that if the soul is like the sky, in that it never mixes with anything, then how it became conditioned by material nature? Same good question as before. Uddhava presents such arguments just to clear up the understanding of actual spiritual life. Here's Vishwanath's actual commentary. Quote, according to you, The goal is liberation. This is achieved by practice of bhakti, gyan, and vairagya. When that takes place, the person is said to be liberated, but I do not understand this, unquote. Even though Dattatreya and Bharata were liberated, they maintained gross and subtle bodies. Now, this is apparently Jad Bharat, because both Dattatreya and Jad Bharat were Avaduta Brahmins, but they had material bodies. They were liberated, although they acted as if they didn't have one, or they were absolutely detached from it. So although they were liberated, they maintained gross and subtle bodies, since we hear that they ate, slept, and walked about. If that is so, why is that jiva not bound by the gunas, since he exists within the gunas of his body? If you say the uncovered jiva is not bound up because he is like the ether in his spiritual state, that is, sky doesn't mix with anything. Things are within the sky, but the sky doesn't mix with anything because it's more subtle. He is like the ether in his spiritual state, then bondage should not have occurred at all. How was the uncovered jiva bound up? By the body. And Kramasandarbha commentary translation, Uddhava said, "O Lord, the jiva in his unconditioned state exists in the gunas created by his body, but he is not bound up by the gunas. Or is he bound up?" And commentary, though the jivas exist uncovered by the gunas, deha jeshu, does he not become bound up? Or if he exists uncovered, does he become bound up? In the absence of the gunas, the jiva would be liberated. The gunas would, by their nature, cover him if present. So it's unanswered questions. That was text 35. And here's 36, 37. Yeah. 36, 37 translation. Oh, my Lord Achyuta, the same living entity is sometimes described as eternally conditioned, and at other times eternally liberated. I'm not able to understand, therefore, the actual situation of the living entity. You, my Lord, are the best of those who are expert in answering philosophical questions. Please explain to me the symptoms by which one can tell the difference between a living entity who is eternally liberated and one who is eternally conditioned. In what various ways would they remain situated? Enjoy life, eat, evacuate, lie down, sit, or move about. That's the BBT translation. Here's Bhakti Siddhanta's translation. O Achyuta, the living entity is sometimes described as eternally conditioned and at other times as eternally liberated. Because of this, I'm not able to understand the actual situation of the living entity. My Lord, you are the best of those who are expert in answering philosophical questions. Please explain to me the symptoms by which one can tell the difference between a living entity who is eternally liberated and one who is eternally conditioned. In what ways are they situated and how do they enjoy life? It sounds like almost verbatim for the BBT. Good for them. Here's the BBT purport. In previous verses, Lord Krishna has explained to Uddhava that an eternally liberated soul is beyond the three modes of material nature, since the liberated soul is considered to be beyond even the superior mode of goodness. How can he be recognized? By false identification with the modes of nature which produce one's own material body, one is bound by illusion. On the other hand, by transcending the modes of nature, one is liberated. However, in ordinary activities, eating, evacuating, relaxing, sitting, sleeping, a liberated soul and a conditioned soul appear to be the same. Therefore, Uddhava is inquiring, quote, by what symptoms can I recognize that one living entity is performing such external activities without false ego, and by what symptoms I can recognize one who is working under the illusory bondage of material identification? This is difficult because the ordinary bodily functions of liberated and conditioned personalities appear similar, unquote. Uddhava has approached the Supreme Personality of Godhead, taking him as his personal spiritual master, and wants to be enlightened about how to understand the differences between material and spiritual life. Paragraph. Since the living entity is sometimes called eternally conditioned, how can he ever be considered eternally liberated, or vice versa? This is an apparent contradiction which will be cleared up by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We're eagerly awaiting. Bhaktisiddhanta's quite extensive purport starts in the Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila, chapter 20, text 109, and then again 117. It is said, Jivera Swarupaya Krishnara Nityadas Krishnara Tatasta Shakti Beda Bed Prakash. Translation. It is the living entity's constitutional position to be an eternal servant of Krishna because he is the marginal energy of Krishna and a manifestation simultaneously one with and different from the Lord. And then same chapter, verse 117. Krishna Buli se Jiva Anadi Bahir Mukha Ataiva Maya Tare Deya Sangsara Dukha Bahir Mukha. It's right there in Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's a phrase that Jiva Goswami also used. By forgetting Krishna, the living entity has become materialistic since time immemorial. And therefore, the illusory energy of Krishna is giving him different types of miseries in material existence. Paragraph. Conditional and liberated, both these states are adjectives. These two natures, when seen from two different angles, are known by two different names, according to the difference in the propensity of service. The conditioned and liberated states are ascertained. When one is manifested, the other disappears. That's it. That's his commentary. His summary of Vishwanath's commentary. Uddhava says, quote, as long as the living entities identify themselves as products of matter, they continue to remain conditioned by the illusory energy. As soon as they are free from this misconception, they become liberated from material bondage. If this is a fact, then how can I recognize who is liberated and who is conditioned? Paragraph. Uddhava goes on to say, quote, both liberated and conditioned souls eat, pass, stool, and urine, sleep, walk, sit, talk. How can I recognize who is performing these activities under the direction of the modes of nature and who is acting free from Maya's influence? Paragraph. Personalities like Dattatreya and Bharata, meaning Jad Bharata, were eternally liberated souls, whereas Deva Datta and Yagya Datta were eternally conditioned souls. Since their bodily activities appear similar, I'm confused, unable to differentiate between them. Therefore, please tell me how one can recognize an eternally conditioned and an eternally liberated soul. And here's Vishwanath's actual commentary. Quote, if one is bound by identity with senses and sense objects, then by destruction of the sense objects, senses and gunas, one becomes liberated, even in the presence of the gunas. How should I understand this? Unquote. Uddhava thus asked questions. What qualities should I seek in a liberated person since existing, enjoying, eating, evacuation, sleeping, sitting, and going are actions related to material identity? Such perfectly liberated persons like Dattatreya and Bharata carry out daily activities like the completely bound jivas. They seem to be the same. This is confusing. It is impossible for me to understand the difference. You must tell me. The word nitya here means perfect. And two more references, and that's it for this morning. One is, this verse is being spoken or referred to in a commentary by Jiva Goswami as follows. So it's from the next chapter, which we're going to next, 11:11:5, and then 11:11:11. So it's this chapter is being, the question from this chapter is being referred to in the next chapter, naturally. So here this is Jiva Goswami, I believe. Hear about the difference between the Jiva and Paramatma, who display opposite qualities, though situated in one body. Paragraph. Uddhava asked about the qualities of the liberated Jiva. That's this morning's verse, text 36. We hear statements like, quote, the Jiva is in bondage and that Jiva is liberated. Or, quote, the Jiva is in bondage and Paramatma is liberated. Or, quote, the Atma is without sin. First, hear about the difference between Jiva and Paramatma. This is explained in 1.5 verses. Two possessors of qualities with opposite natures, viruta dharminoho, namely lamentation on one side and bliss on the other, are situated in one body as the controlled and the controller. So that gives us a hint of what's coming. Paramatma and Jiva, to compare, contrast. Finally, referring to a later verse in chapter 11, an enlightened person, fixed in detachment, engages his body in lying down, sitting, walking, bathing, seeing, touching, smelling, eating, hearing, and so on, but is never bound by such activities. Situated as a witness to all these actions, he merely engages in his bodily senses with their sense objects. So this is now speaking of the living entity as a witness in addition to the Paramatma witness. So while doing things, he's not identifying with them, he's witnessing. And, it's I am the seat of consciousness. It's one of the tools for stress management and suicide hotlines and things like that, is helping people. Over there is a screen called the mind, and in the mind there's an image, and you're the observer of the screen and the image in the screen. But so you're the observer, you're not that impression. The impression doesn't go away, but it's detachment. So a self-realized soul has that detachment. They see, they move, they walk, they do, they interact with the world around them, but they see themselves as the observer and not, the observed, and the emotions connected with those interactions. Last paragraph. Uddhava asked, quote, how does he sleep and eat? This morning's verse. This is answered in 3 verses. The bound jiva is bound to joy and sorrow arising from his actions for attaining sleep, sitting, or eating out of attachment. Sadasad yoni janmasu, Bhagavad Gita, same. Sankhya. We're the cause of our good fortune, ill fortune, or the happiness or the stress. But the happiness or the stress is in the mind. It's just we're the observer of it, and because of false ego, we identify with it. There's this, and then there's this feeling connected to this. There's that, but it's not who we are. But because we identify with it through the agency of false ego, we experience good fortune, ill fortune, happiness and distress, duality. So this next chapter is detachment from that misconception. It's furthering these last 4 chapters in practical life. At least that's the intention of Krishna to Uddhava. The liberated person is not bound while doing these activities, even though he may experience a little joy or sorrow, as in Badita Nuvriti. Badita Nuvriti. This is because he is detached. Though he engages his senses in sense objects, he remains as the witness, does not personally involve himself. We have a long ways to go, right? But we're getting the map. You got the GPS says, okay, put in your destination. Okay, boop, boop, boop. And here's the map to get there. 2 more nice graphics, compliments of Shruti Mangara. Sri Uddhava said, this is verse 35. O my Lord, a living entity situated within the material body is surrounded by the modes of nature and the happiness and distress that are being born of activities caused by these modes. How is it possible that he is not bound by this material encirclement? It may also be said that the living entity is ultimately transcendental and has nothing to do with the material world. Then, how is he ever bound by material nature? And then comes another nice graphic. This is part of a picture, a major portion of a picture. This is not Uddhava Gita. This is what happens later. What happens later is that Krishna sends Uddhava to go speak to the sages of Badrinath, the sages of Naranarayan, Rishi, and he starts to go. And then they're in Dwarka. Krishna leaves Dwarka, goes to what you see here, the bank of the river Saraswati near Prabhas. And Uddhava can't take separation from Krishna. He doubles back and he finds Krishna leaning against a young banyan tree, as you see here, manifesting his four-armed form. And Uddhava makes further inquiry. That's what the picture is, but we're still in Dwarka here, so here's what he says to Krishna in Dwarka. Oh, my Lord Achyuta, something's wrong. That some living entity is sometimes described as eternally conditioned soul, and other times as an eternally liberated souls. Oh, I see. The same living entity is sometimes described as eternally conditioned and other times as eternally liberated. I am not able to understand. Therefore, the actual position of the living entity. You, my Lord, are the best of those who are expert in answering philosophical questions. Please explain to me the symptoms by which one can tell the difference between a living entity who is eternally liberated and one who is eternally conditioned. In what various ways would they remain situated, enjoy life, eat, evacuate, lie down, sit, or move about? Now, isn't there a similar discussion in Bhagavad Gita where Arjuna wants to know by what symptoms, how does he walk, how does he sit? So, similar question. And we're going to get a far more elaborate answer from Uddhava Gita. That's the relationship between Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, the ripened fruit. And all the while, Uddhava understands liberation is what Krishna is advocating, but of course liberation in the complete form is devotional life. Devotional life. This situation of detachment, again, I'm just hearing this morning, speaking in Geneva, there's an idea that detachment means become a sannyasi or a vanaprastha or a brahmachari, and that way be detached. But grihastha life, the same principle is applied if done properly. And his point was it's not where there's attachment, it is not easily performed. Even when there's detachment, it's not easily performed. But where there's attachment, it's not performed. But it's the same principle. And the same principle that we heard earlier in this chapter 10, seeing things as being separate from the Lord, that's Maya. And as long as one sees things separate from the Lord, one is bound by Prakriti. And Prakriti, bound by Prakriti, means the modes of nature. And as one acts according to the modes of nature, one experiences the worldly happiness, distress, guaranteed, the worldly happiness and distress, and guaranteed also fruitive activities, which means bondage to future bodies. And it's perpetual. It's a perpetual motion machine. Unless there's starting with knowledge and detachment, then leading into a life of devotion to what's behind, which we can't see when we're living in an attached life. So knowledge and detachment is preliminary. It's not the essence. But it gives the opportunity for one to receive bhakti message better. So that's what this it's a step. It's not like a big quantum jump like Prabhupada would sometimes do from being a conditioned soul to a perfected soul. It's a little more, in between all the gradual steps. It's going to be a very interesting discussion. So let's see if there's some comments or questions.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. I'm just thinking in regard of family life, where attachments outside of the family or very close circle, being observant and witnessing is easier than being in the close relationship. I felt being observant and witnessing, it still bring a lot of pain, and seems like that sense of feel to be loved, or so many needs are being challenged, and still that there's a lot of pain and still comes with that.
We've discussed this, so we'll do it again. Let's go to the transcendentalist. who's beyond the modes. And that one of the examples that I've been referring to lately is Suniti. I mean, she's as far as I can see, as far as I can understand, she's a pure devotee. And when she hears what happened to Dhruva, she feels really sad. She feels very disturbed. And at the same time, she doesn't depart from shelter. She accepts it as, arrangement of providence, providential arrangement. I mean, because we just heard the same with Sita, she accepts it as a providential arrangement, but we can't say, well, she's the goddess of fortune and I'm a little jiva. So then we'll go to Suniti. She's a jiva. She's not the goddess of fortune. And so where there's genuine shelter, and so then how do we get genuine shelter? Rather than focus on what's out there, because when you focus on what's out there, the mind has a way, this is stress management, the mind has a way of making it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and what is imprisoned by those emotions that are bigger than reality. They're not properly sized, even. What to speak of having, shelter. Shelter gets lost. That's the nature of, the conditioning or conditioned dynamic. What to do? It's not a new question. It's not, the answer is not a new answer. It's stress management 101, or overcoming negative emotions. And it's not, it's not unique. I can share with you when there's options of what students would like to hear, this is way up there on what they'd like to hear because they experience it. And if they're involved in Krishna consciousness, they're involved in Krishna consciousness because there's some spiritual inclination, whatever may be their position in spiritual trajectory, they're somewhere, they're up there, because otherwise they would be doing something else besides coming to our Bhakti Club programs. But so anyway, aside from my point here is it's not unique. It's rather quite universal. Quite universal. And so then there's steps of what to do. I can repeat the steps, but you've heard them, listen to the recordings, and there's like 10 times over explained what the steps are. And then, the nature of emotion, the modern phrase, one of the modern phrases is emotional intelligence. So with the intelligence, one can manage emotion. Emotional intelligence. Some people are better at it than others, and sometimes it's better and sometimes it's more difficult, and all of those things. But a spiritual conception goes even beyond emotional intelligence. It's being grounded in our relationship. So back to Suniti. She's grounded in her relationship. And so she knew what to do. And she did it. Because intelligence was given, she received it, and she used it. She helped her son, to whatever degree he would listen. While she's feeling the feelings she was feeling, she's guiding her son to not go into the mode of ignorance and get in a retaliating spirit. He didn't give up the retaliating spirit, but she was speaking, take shelter of higher principles. Because of speaking like that as a mother to her son, it was a kind of support for her to go to higher principles rather than lower principles. Because she could have, that's Suruchi. I'm going to make a plan to scratch her eyes out or something. I'm going to get back at her. But that is not what she did. She was feeling emotion, really hurt, crying. One of the things that Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur says in his commentary is she, in essence, is saying to her son, from the time, something like this, from the time of my birth, it was written on my forehead that I would have to undergo tribulation. And she wasn't like sad about it. She just, that's what's meant for me. Wasn't mad at Krishna, wasn't mad at Suruchi. It's not so. Something that helps those dealing with those emotions is to have shelter. When there's shelter, it's not it's not that just one becomes a fatalist and I shrug my shoulders and say, "Okay, Sara, whatever will be, will be." But in terms of relationship, I accept the relationship, and then let me make choices that are appropriate for the circumstance. And it's not, scratch out Suruchi's eyes, or cut out her tongue, or poison her or something. It's it's a relationship with Krishna set of choices. And as a mother, she was doing primarily for her son. Anyway, so that she's a role model for dealing with the negative emotions that come about simply because all these things we're reading from Sankhya were infected by the modes. Infected by the modes were covered by Maya. And covered by Maya, we do fruitive activities. And we do fruitive activities. We're experiencing the fruits of those fruitive activities, some up and some down, and some mixed. And we just keep going along on this roller coaster, and it doesn't stop. We vomit a few times, and then we're still on the roller coaster. So is that it? That's all there is? Or is there some way? Prabhupada's way of saying this is, it takes being thoughtful to become a devotee. Is this really necessary? What's the option? And then for this coming chapter, what are the steps? Then comes application, even while dealing with the negative emotion that's taking one for a ride. It's just the mind. So one can, the steps, you step back from the mind, you're the observer of the emotion. And the events that perpetrated the emotion, you're the observer. That's Brahman realization. Brahmabhuta prasanatma na sochati. So we're not there yet. So what do you do when you're not there yet? You keep going. And the most important is the hearing process. And then following the hearing process, the application of the hearing. But even the hearing, without applying, it's beneficial. And the potential is, I'll start applying better tomorrow than I've been doing yesterday. And further purification in between that makes the hearing clearer and stronger, so I can hear the message. And when the hearing of the message is heard, proof is there's application. Even if it's an incremental application. That's Bhagavad Dharma. That's what we're doing. It's meant to lift not necessarily the negative emotion, but the being entangled in the negative, the complexities of the whole show. I mean, the situation is Krishna is going to leave Uddhava, and he ends up leaving Uddhava. And he's feeling those same emotions after he leaves. So much so he doubles back and tries it again. But Krishna's going to leave. So that's the fruit of being attached to Krishna. But because he's attached to Krishna, those emotions are ecstatic love. They're not just the worldly negative emotions. That's the picture. Transcendental emotion, replacing the mundane emotion that just keeps going around like a Ferris wheel, endlessly, with ignorance of who we are and our relationship. So it starts with turning our attention away, bahir mukha, just as we read, and the cure is turning attention again to Krishna. Antarmukha, looking within. Let's see if there's something else. Yes?
Krishna, Guru Maharaj. So you mentioned the importance of seeing things in relation to Krishna. I was wondering, if someone is above the modes of material nature, in one sense he sees everything in relation to the Lord, does this mean he sees gross material desires in one sense with appreciation, because in one sense indirectly they're still related to the Lord, even though he doesn't act upon them? But
well, they're reflections of the existence of contaminated desire is a reflection of the pure desire. So I don't have to act on it. Let's say anger. I don't have to act on it. But where does it come from? So I can make, this is your question from yesterday, I can make free will choices. Even there's an influence acting on me due to my past involvement with the modes of nature. Supposing one's past involvement with the modes of nature is higher, then the same thing can happen. I'm not going to feel anger. Now, one of the classic examples that you refer to again and again is a poor man that gains some wealth and then loses it. And there's feelings connected with that sequence of events. Yeah. And he feels, terrible. Looks around and looks, where's that wealth? It's gone, and someone stole it, or I misplaced it, or something. Or, whatever, a criminal. Because it's criminal, then there's a natural, I may get caught, and then they're running to not get caught, and then they get caught, and, that whole, that's just where does that come from? Those bad thoughts, bad emotions. It's a perverted reflection. Krishna steals, but he's stealing his own property, and we're stealing his property. But he's having fun, and the gopis, they're not criticizing, although they have fun coming to Mother Yasoda. So anyways, the pure form is elsewhere. And so when one encounters some impure desire, lust, anger, greed, etc., it has a spiritual, so you don't have to identify with it, and you can make choices that are on the spiritual platform, at least leading towards the mode of goodness. And this is just hearing it this morning, whatever you do, don't go to the mode of ignorance. You don't be infected by the mode of ignorance. He was saying, so some persons think, let me prosper and enjoy. They become nice house, nice bank balance, nice family, everything's nice. He said, that's not ideal, but don't go to the mode of ignorance. everything becomes destroyed. And strive from that position for the mode of goodness. And then transcendence. So it's just a cultivation. So how do you see those? You see with detachment. Because if detachment isn't there, it's going to carry you away. That's how the modes of nature work. They carry one like waves, carries one. And then detachment is, wait a minute, there's this influence, but that's not me, it's an influence due to past association with, I've been infected or affected. Infected, I like that word. So now I have a disease. I get infected, a disease called the mode of nature. But it's not me. Part of self-realization, it's minimal, but it requires that detachment, knowledge and detachment. Otherwise, I can't go nicely into the house of bhakti. I'll still be, notional, bumping around. Something else?
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Hearing these questions, I'm very anxious to hear the answers.
Stay tuned.
My question, Maharaj, the text 35, you mentioned that is similar to Mother Devahuti's question to Lord Kapila Dev.
Yeah.
So I was recollecting that in one of the questions, Mother Devahuti asked, will this material nature ever give release to the living entities? I don't remember the answer, but in
And the answer specifically is, bhakti has the power to dissolve that link between us and the material energy, which is the subtle body. Bhakti alone has that power. Nothing else has that power. That's it. That's the answer.
in that section, Lord Kapila Dev mentioned more than once Tivira Bhakti.
Yeah.
So I was trying to understand
Don't be
that
complacent. That's what it means.
in the sadhana level, how the bhakti can be intensified.
How? Well, you know how to do. Don't ask how. Apply yourself. It's a from the heart conscious decision, and you stay with it. Even the modes of nature take you away, and the distracted mind goes away, and you stay with it. You reapply yourself, and then the heart, the intelligence, the mind, and the body. The alignment principle starts with the heart. Anything?
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Yes, we have some questions.
Okay, we're going over here first.
This is from Narayan Prabhu. While praying to Krishna, we are not supposed to ask anything.
Well, wait a minute.
Ca-
Wait a minute. I'm interrupting the premise of the question. One may certainly ask Krishna for something.
Yeah. So can't we ask for liberation?
You can ask for liberation, but better you ask for bhakti, because bhakti, liberation is a subset of bhakti.
This is from Nega Mataji. Do past life sin also come as obstacles in our sadhana bhakti?
Sure. We're attachment to them. It's an obstacle. No, it's his question also. Supposing, past life something. Supposing this life something, or a combination. Those are thoughts and emotions. That's where they come from. This life, past life. And so they arise like a bubble in a pond. It's just whether we identify with them or not.
So the next question is from Ramakishore Das Prabhu from yesterday. Maharaj, how does one deal with distress within one's community, specifically one devotee in a leadership role whose behavior is pushing people away versus engaging devotees?
You rest your faith in Krishna. You try to be a servant of the community and that particular devotee. And if circumstance requires, then you bring this dynamic, in a service mood, you bring this dynamic to the attention of some higher authority. And there's different higher authority categories, depending upon the circumstance. But don't depart from your shelter taking in Krishna in the course of doing any one of those things. Next.
So the next is from Uddhava Bhakta Prabhu. What is the end of Pravarti Marg after reaching the summit of enjoyment? Inquiry, merging, or merging back, or something else? Can we say that the soul is not directly impacted by the matter and modes, but indirectly it feels the impact by the agency of false ego and Maya's two potencies?
Yes, to the second question. And the end of the Pravriti Marg, there is no end. It's an endless path. There is no end. Next.
It's from Snehavali Mataji. If you could please elaborate on the word eternally. If we are Nitya Bhakta or eternally conditioned, then where is the scope of getting liberated even if we do not identify with the modes?
Your question is Uddhava's question, and Krishna is going to give a whole chapter to answer Uddhava's question, which will answer your question. There's a short narrative is, there are different ways of identifying anadi. And that's where some confusion enters. Anadi means beginningless. Adi, that which is without beginning. So there's the absolute, without beginning, like the soul, is anadi. And then another one of the understandings of conditioned life is it's literally absolutely eternal. And another notion is you go back in time and back in time and back in time and back in time, and you can't find where the beginning is. That's another kind of understanding of anadi. And I request you, please read the coming chapter, and you'll find more questions as well as more answers. I anticipate many questions as we go forward in time with this question that Uddhava has raised. It's a classic. Next.
Next is from Sri Devi Mataji from yesterday's class. Regarding Swabhava and Swadharma, as I understand, Swabhava is our psychophysical nature influenced by guna, and it is materially situated. It is referenced different in yesterday's class. Could you please comment?
Yes. According to context, one word may have different meanings. And it's not that if this meaning is right, then that meaning is wrong, or if that meaning is right, then this meaning is wrong. It can have different meanings depending upon context. And sometimes, this is one of those sometimes examples, that our acharyas will look at one word as having multiple possible meanings, and they elaborate, or at least indicate one meaning could be this, one meaning could be that, another meaning could be the other thing, and it's rendering the Sanskrit into the context of the statement that's being made, and one can read it this way, and one can read it that way. It's for those of us with binary processor minds, it's like baffling, because if it's this, then it can't be that, and if it's that, it can't be this. It's either this or that. So which is it? And our acharyas don't necessarily, sometimes they do like that, but they don't necessarily restrict themselves to it's either this or that. They look at the various options that fit into the big picture of Siddhanta, Krishna Tattva Siddhanta, the truths about Krishna. And it can have this meaning, can have that meaning. That's my explanation. It's not so. Some of the commentary we read yesterday was the classic, what we're used to hearing, what Swabhava means. What the Bhagavad Gita explanation. Brahma karma swabhavajam. Swabhava. The Brahmana is situated in the mode of goodness, and the Swabhava has certain symptoms mentioned in that section. So that's that's how we're accustomed to understanding the meaning of the word Swabhava. But in another context, it could mean something else and mean something else.
This is from Amara Mataji. Knowledge and detachment are products of bhakti, but unless we have knowledge of Krishna Tattva and his unlimited mercy, the bhakti may not uncover. Here, Krishna is also instructing on detachment.
Wait. Amara, your premise has flaws. And I could just let you go on with your premise, but the premise itself has flaws. For example, there is knowledge and detachment that is not arising from bhakti. The impersonalists, let's say, those who imperfectly read the Vedas, imperfectly means they don't make the bhakti connection. They have knowledge, and they have detachment. They have detachment, at least by external appearances, which seems really extreme, and not so common amongst the bhaktas who have knowledge of detachment of a different kind. But they have knowledge of detachment, devoid of bhakti. So the premise of your question, or the preamble here, is incomplete. Now, one of the conceptions of knowledge of detachment is that which arises from bhakti. Now, if that's the premise of your question, then you can read further what the question says.
So how to understand that first bhakti is there and then it brings knowledge and detachment?
Well, when bhakti awakens, then the incomplete bhakti becomes more complete, or it becomes substantial. It's not, now you see it, now you don't. It's not of a temporary nature. When real bhakti awakens, there's real knowledge and real detachment. That's how to understand it.
That's it.
We're done. There's something else over there.
There is
One more. Pass the microphone.
This is question by Lal Gopal Prabhu. Dandvat Maharaj, I'm still not clear with the concept for eternally conditioned and liberated. Can you kindly summarize in easy way for me to understand?
Let us read the next chapter, because the whole next chapter is addressing that question. And the short is, there are different ideas of what eternally conditioned, eternally liberated are. Let's hear from Krishna and the commentaries. What are those different conceptions? Okay. Where's one more?
Said it's from Bhagavatam perspective. Her questions.
Okay. Hare Krishna. Prabhupada ki jai.
There we go.